Dr. Dury?
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I want to begin the presentation with just providing you an overview of where we ended the prior fiscal year. We are currently going through the year-end audit. We should be finishing that up sometime this week. As the city manager mentioned, when we presented to council, I think it was back in August, we had projected the reserves within at 6%. They actually have come in slightly better than that, at 6.3%, and I'm pretty comfortable that that's where the number will stand, based on the fact that the audit is almost complete. We did drop into the reserves in the prior year about $1.8 million more than we had anticipated. That was primarily due to lower than anticipated revenues and sales tax, primarily due to the operations of the Ocean Center. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in one of the presentations I have. So between the sales tax shortfalls and the franchise fee shortfalls, and with development continuing to slow down, we anticipate a gap of $8.6 million in the current year budget. And when the city manager began his term here, he imposed a hiring freeze back in June. So because of that, we anticipate that we'll have savings of about $1.2 million that I can account for currently. So that would bring our budgetary gap to about $7.4 million. Now, if we continue operating under the current budgetary structure, we anticipate that the reserves would drop to $3 million or 1.8% reserve level, which really doesn't give you the flexibility that we need. One thing I do want to mention is, because historically this has happened to cities, the state is also going through similar struggles with their revenue shortfalls, and historically the state has found ways to burden cities with balancing their budgets, and I just need to caution you that we are not assuming that we're going to help the state in fixing their budgetary crisis at this point, but that is to say that they may not happen. Now, as part of the first quarter report, what we asked the departments to provide us is their current projections. And we do have additional shortfalls that were identified by planning and building and engineering that adds to the gap. They were projected between $550,000 to $800,000 additional revenue shortfalls. They're not tied to building permits, they're actually tied to staff being able to charge to development-related projects. So we haven't had an opportunity, because these projections actually came in on Friday, we haven't had an opportunity to really sit down and analyze these numbers yet. But if you add that to the gap, we're actually looking at something more in the $8 million range the current year. I'm going to talk briefly about sales tax, because we did make it rounds with the city manager and we're going through a lot of these charges with a lot of employees. But I do want to highlight the sales tax number. The bars show the increase in sales tax over the last several years, and you can see from a dollar perspective, we have had growth in sales tax, and we did have growth in sales tax last year. But when we balanced it, or with the budgetary assumptions that we used last year, we assumed that sales tax would grow at 16.7% in 07 from 06. 06 we experienced a 13.2% increase. Now the reason we assumed a higher growth was because we had the Old Time Ranch Center that came on board, we had the crossings law that came on board, and we expanded the auto park. So we worked with our consultants to try to come up with an estimate on that. Now in reality what happened is it came in quite a bit short, and we actually came in at about 7.9%. So that impacted the reserves for the prior year, and it also impacted the assumptions that we're using in the current year budget, which is why the gap is as large as it is. So when we actually adopted the budget, when you adopted the budget, we were assuming a 5% growth from the prior year. We have adjusted that down to 3.5%. So not only have we adjusted the dollar base down, we're also adjusting down the percentage growth. This chart I also want to share with you, because this is actually a revenue stream that's been dropping over the last few years and impacted us for the last 3 years. As you can see, in 2005 we were realizing about $3.6 million related to energy in the South Bay Power Plant. The operation of the power plant has been dropping year by year. So the revenues that we're actually generating or receiving from that power plant is continuing to impact our reserves. And so that's also adding to the gap in the current year. And as you can see from the chart, it's the green bars that you see on the presentation here. We are phasing that out in terms of our forecast. We are assuming that that power plant will no longer generate the revenues that it has historically, and so that's also impacting the ability for us to maintain the budget at the levels that we have. The other area that's actually impacting our gap is development, and I'm going to turn it over to Ed to discuss that.
What this slide is showing you is
the historical changes in our residential building activity. These are the number of single-family and multi-family residences, residential building permits that have been issued each year. You can see for the greater part of, from 2000 to 2004, 2005, we were issuing over 2,000, and in some years over 3,000 building permits a year, with a peak of over 300 building permits per month in fiscal year 2003, 2004. You can see the dramatic drop we've had in that development activity in recent years. In the current budget projections, we're assuming we're going to see a continuation of that drop down to 600 units. We actually realized 843 units last year, and in the budget gap numbers you're going to see later on in the presentation, we're assuming we're going to get 600, which at this point may be optimistic. The first 4 months of the fiscal year, we've actually issued 60 building permits, so things are going to have to pick up considerably in order to make 600 by the end of the year. So there is a good likelihood that these revenues projections could come down somewhat even from their current level. And this slowdown in development activity has a number of impacts on our revenues. It doesn't only impact the revenues we get from a development processing perspective, it affects our property tax base, our assessed values. So a slowdown here does result in a slowdown in our growth in property taxes. It also represents fewer new citizens coming to live in the city, fewer shoppers in the city, which also has an impact on our sales taxes. So I think part of the reason you're seeing some of this slowdown in the growth of those revenue sources is related to this fairly dramatic slowdown in our residential building permits.
Mr.